I'm delighted this evening to introduce my colleague, friend, and mentor, Alan Michael Parker. You can read Alan Michael's official bio and see that he's the Douglas C. Hutchins Professor of English at Davidson College. You'll see he's published many collections of poetry and 4 novels. If you dig a little deeper, you'll even find that he's one of the judges, one of the 5 judges for the 2021 National Book Awards in fiction. But what you won't find listed on any biography is just what a marvelously gifted teacher he is to inspiring writers, his students. And I'm excited that and I think all of us tonight can count ourselves as his students. He's going to tell us how he invents people wholesale, not just from words as we might expect from a writer, but also from drawings, diagrams, documents, any piece of expressive material. I've long known that Alan Michael creates his characters from both his imagination and real life people he knows. Whether that should flatter my Davidson College colleagues watching tonight or make them paranoid, I'll leave that up to them to decide. But certainly we are going to learn something new about what it takes to make imagination come alive. So please join me in welcoming Alan Michael Parker.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jaya. And John Wertheimer, also the co-curator of the Being Human series. It's really a pleasure to be here and an honor to be asked to participate in such a colloquium and to share work. So as Mark says, and as I imagine most of you know, I'm a writer, which means that as soon as you meet me, you can tell that I'm living a little differently. And that my realities probably aren't yours. We probably care about different futures, I would imagine. I can bet that we have a different relationship to time. I look at stuff differently, I would imagine, also than you do. And walking around, well, I actually don't know what you do, because for me, I'm mostly walking around and eyeballing the world and trying to figure out what to make up. So this evening, I'm going to talk about that, what to make up, how to do it, and how especially recent work has been made up. This is where I work. This is my office. You see the studio behind me. But really, I think my office is here. And I guess I would ask you to consider a kind of the fugue state of creativity, the deep mind, the deep thought, where we wander, where we associate, where external stimuli is registered, but perhaps not noticed until it's processed. Because I would argue that that fugue state is actually my job site, because that's where I go to work. It's where I collect my paycheck that's filled only with zeros. Those are artist dollars, which is as of yet a monetary unit not recognized by the World Bank. The fugue state, what the poet Gerald Manley Hopkins called inscape, is indeed, though, where I push the clock. And I try to go every day. I very much am trying to stay in my work as much as possible. And that often means, it means each morning if possible. In this state, in this room and in this state, where what I make up has a chance to come to life. And so tonight, what I will try to do is turn a little bit to the scientist in me and bring home a little specimen of what I've made up, try to keep it alive, and try to show it to you in its living part, which I think is actually a job, right? The writer's job is to bring something living to the reader whose imagination is different from mine. I could go forever with cross-disciplinary analogies. It's deep, profound to me and deep in my own learning, but words are just words. And in fact, I probably need to talk about the words. And I also need to talk a little bit about the nature of making people up, because I do make them up. And it's dicey, making people up. It's got ethical considerations. It's got personal costs. I think often about Plato's condemnation of the poets, which is in book 10 of the Republic, where he famously writes, and I quote, "The tragic poet is an imitator, and therefore, like all other imitators, He is thrice removed from the king and from the truth. Appearances, not knowing very much about reality when I'm in my fugue state, not telling the truth, these are the liabilities of a writer's trade, and perhaps even the ethical violations. They are my vices, according to Plato. But I would argue that they're also my virtues. And for tonight, at least, I would offer that being human in this series and this evening includes being able to invent. And maybe necessarily it depends upon being able to invent and to connect what we invent to the imaginations of others. So I'm going to talk as a fiction writer. I do write poems. That's often that's where I started. I continue to go there. But tonight I'm talking as a fiction writer. And as a fiction writer, I would estimate that I make up about 75% of what you might read of mine. That means I make up towns, jobs, scenarios, objects, foods, animals, toys, the weather, items of clothing, sports teams, and certainly roads. I really like to make up roads. And that's a lot of stuff that doesn't exist. Of course, within the reality of the fictions that I invent, I want you as the reader to believe that what I have invented is possibly true, if not true. And that is, I want you to labor within the bounds of the invented reality until such time that the invention's reality becomes meaningful to you. And notice how I'm turning that from the invented reality to the invention's reality. You have entered the text willingly, I assume, an act of faith upon which I rely, depend even. And in the story that you have entered into, the imaginary and the real have, and I'd say real maybe, have intertwined. They operate within what I will hope be understood to you as a logical system, because that's in fact what I perceive to be a reality, a system of logic. Within that reality, there are rules. There are laws of gravity. You have to solve for K. There is, as John Donne, the poet, writes, a little world made cunningly of elements. And both of us, you the reader and I the writer, agree to follow those rules and try not to violate them. I set them out and try not to violate them, and you believe them and try to maintain your belief. And if we both do our jobs, me inventing and you believing, there's a chance that the project might succeed. But if you're inventing people, that's dangerous. It's difficult. It's also, of course, essential, because you can't be a fiction writer without inventing people. And when I do that, I'm on very, I would say, thin imaginary ice. Because to make up a person, it feels like a God act. And if it's not a God act, if I'm not inventing someone wholly from cloth, then how could it be possible that they will come to life? Of course, it's not biology. It's not 9 months of gestation and a decade of parenting and vaccinations and diapers. And so it does seem in its way presumptuous, if not kind of unethical, to make up someone else. It's fundamentally, if only psychologically, but certainly by way of identity, an act of appropriation. And in that, it's dangerous. It's unsafe. It's unsafe for all of us if the person who's made up poses a challenge to your ethics or to mine. If that's not perilous enough, not to mention perhaps even suspiciously vain to believe in this as a God act, in addition to making up people as a writer and making up my characters, and here comes the part that's, I think, even more outrageous, I'm also interested in making up you. I also want to make up my readers. And that kind of is the subject of my talk tonight, how a writer invents a character and a reader, and how I got to understand this, how I moved from text to, as you might know, tonight I'm talking about cartooning, how I moved into that realm with an eye on inventing my reader. So That's a lot. I'm going to stop for a second. I would jam on the brakes. Crazy bus going off the crazy cliff into the crazy abyss, into the crazy river, drowning crazy. I think, or maybe I'll ask it, shouldn't a writer, in my job, shouldn't it be documenting reality? Isn't it offering insight into the human condition? Isn't it using my ostensibly acquired wisdom, which is ostensibly wise, to present our goodliness, to present the complexities of life as we live it? Would my best writing be what I've lived through? Isn't that perhaps, more appropriate? Well, no, actually, I don't think so. And I would warrant that my personal experience wouldn't be very interesting to you, and that my knowledge, what my wisdom, worse, would prove even less interesting. I think that my writing autobiographically as a fiction writer, entering my personal experience into what I do, is in fact, in my case, it would be an extraordinary act of egotism. For me, that's the part where my vanity becomes active and compromised, because I think my lived life has nothing on my imagination. And I get this in part from a teacher, from a poet of great note, who was one of the crankiest jerks you could possibly imagine, a guy named Howard Nemerov, whose sister was Deanne Arbus, by the way, which made for a lot of wild stories. Deanne Arbus, the photographer. Howard once said, and I'm quoting, "Write what you know," there's the truism, "that should leave you with a lot of free time." Free time has been one hallmark, of course, of the pandemic, at least for me in my writing, my process, and especially given that I consider solitude to be my best friend. Free time and solitude, however, have both changed because the world's changed and being alone has changed. And I know this from my writer friends and artist friends. At the beginning of the pandemic, I couldn't write. It was gone. It was, my inspiration was so horrified into inaction, passivity, terror by the politics of the moment, by the news, by the orange shithead, by you name it. And it was a response to events that I really was hearing from a lot of artists who weren't making new work, where the terms were different. It seemed almost a kind of shame to want to produce art in light of the pandemic. And for me, at least, for someone who thrives on the solitude and the creativity, by April, it didn't take long, I was really a mess. And I needed to do something in my studio practice to change up this notion that I was going to make a work. And so I began to go back into my files, and my thought was that I would find crappy work that I had abandoned, of which there are wheelbarrows full, and tried to renovate and rehabilitate previous work, because it seemed like that way I wouldn't have to invent anything. But with that came the kind of self criticism, the question of self-esteem, even of the working artist, which is, what am I doing? What do words do? How could this be real when people are dying? And what's my job? Right. So and that really became a question. I do think that my job in part is to entertain. And I know that's not an idea associated often with the literary arts. But I think that an investigation into peopledom is also an act of entertainment. I think my job includes my imagination and not my lived life. And so my job includes making people up. As the pandemic worsened, I began to believe that my own differences required me to reconsider my suppositions and not just rehabilitate the broken work, but try to think about making new work, making work differently. And that's where I ended up. I think what I'll do now is I have a couple of, I'm going to skip like 3 steps. I can come back later if you like. But I'm going to say very briefly that rather than talk about the specific transformations that got me through this process, what I started making, where it went, I'm happy to handle that in a Q&A. But suffice to say, here's the short version. I was filling in a lot of online quizzes. I was like all clickbait, like all the time. And then BuzzFeed. And then I started thinking, well, I should make my own online quizzes and I should like post them. And I've always, as a number of you know, I've always used polls. Like I put polls on the board, I've used polls in Zoom. So that was part of my process. I thought, okay, I should start doing that. And then I'd had a bingo card on my desktop for a very long time. And it occurred to me that I should maybe make a story with a bingo card, which got me to imagining subway maps that don't exist. I thought, okay, I can do that, which led to infographics and EKGs, which led to full-on cartooning. Really where I am now. And that should terrify you because I have no training in art, like zero. Like everything I draw looks like Woody Woodpecker. It's really, really bad. And nevertheless, it's what I do. It's where I am. And it's what this stuff is. It's what the pandemic has taught me, that my own eccentricities as an artist need actually to be where I go in response to the world not making sense. That my boundaries need to be challenged for me to make more sense about myself. And also, especially for me, not to be too comfortable with my own practice. That the discomfort was really generative ultimately when I let it be. But now I have to invent people twice. And that's the problem. Poems, of course, ask the reader to participate. Poems operate on multiple levels at once, and your mind is very much part of that. Fiction does that over a broader terrain with a broader brush, but still very much asks you to participate, narrate the story in your head, reconstitute the plot if that's an issue. But what I've started to do is I've started instead to work with cartoons that have non-realistic images and that are complementing the text that I'm generating. And so what I'll do now is I'm just going to talk through, I've got like 5 cartoons ready to go in a PowerPoint. And I want to talk through, and I'll talk through the first one. And then maybe what I really would love is to talk through together the others as I post them and have this be a little bit more interactive. Also, I should say that quite generously, the college has helped, and that I've been able to hire and work with an amazing studio art and digital studies major, Adele Patton, who has been my assistant through this process and who handles the Photoshop work, but also really has been a great sounding board in a lot of ways. And Adele's here, and what I'll do is I'll share some cartoons, and then we have a number of drafts of a cartoon that went from me to Adele and back again. And we would like to talk through our process together. And then Q&A can open up to me, to Adele, to the process, to whatever it is that interests you. So that's where we're going to go next. And here comes the work. And I should say too that with one exception, absolutely nothing that I'm sharing has been seen. Nothing's out there. Nothing's being published yet. This is all work in progress in the most. So yeah. So here we go. And let's see how much I can. So can you folks tell me how much can you get text? Is this, because I'm going to narrate through some of the text. You can't get text? It's not big enough. So, all right, let's try another thing. Let's try. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to give you this overall of the cartoon, and then I'm going to let you see text. And I'll move it this way. Is that legible? Are you able to, yeah? Okay, great. So the title of this piece is Rosa Photocopies the Jones Head 1903, from anatomy class and fills it in over breakfast on Sunday. This is a one-page story. It's also a cartoon. It is populated textually, and I drew it in draft form, sent it to Adele, who rendered it. We went back and forth a couple of times on it. So my notion of this particular character, I won't keep scrolling because that'll make you crazy, is that this is a med student who has finally gotten a break from her 6 straight days of being of triple shifting, and that she, from her anatomy class, she really liked this blank head and she photocopied it, but then she wrote her own text into it. So that's my concept. With the cartoons, you really do need to read the titles of the cartoons. It's like they're not untitled. The title is the first thing you go to. And you'll see here it says med school is for robots right there in the frontal cortex. Cute guy with an unexplained beer injury, which is a UBI. And actually that's a medical term. So also I will research within certain vernaculars, and you'll see there's a lot of specific, there's a lot of language specific to various disciplines. So turns out UBI is a thing. You can have an unexplained beer injury, which might be the highlight of my cartooning. Loans, right? That's where they're going to be. Friends versus grades is here. Can't fail, and notice the different colors, right? So that's very much at the center of her thoughts and her own motivations. Don't let Corman follow you into supply. A little bit of sexual harassment. That's a slight problem. That's my perception of it. Will they test for weed? Is here. Always mixing up the atlas and the axis, and those are spinal. That's about your spine, and actually it's right there. There's the atlas and the axis. 3 24-hour shifts this week doing the Jack Bowers. So it turns out a Jack Bauer is a med student term for pulling a 24-hour shift. They call them Jack Bowers. So again, this is part of research. I'm doing the lingo. I'm making her up. Branghampton was a fucking joke. So this is Adele, don't be horrified. So my handwriting, I wrote Binghamton because that's where I wanted her to have gone to school. And Adele wrote Branghampton. And I loved Branghampton because it just made no sense to me. I kept it. And that went back and forth. And I was going to correct it. I was like, Branghampton is just like, that's just great. There would be something we would not know about her. Eyes up, cover the boob, talk more, study. Like what she has that's holding up her head, eyes up, cover the boobs, talk more, study. Central to this idea of the cartoon is an idea that's really important to me. And it comes from having taught Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, which is a kind of Bible for me when I'm teaching graphic novels, especially. And McCloud talks really well, really smartly about the idea of closure. And closure for him has to do with what happens between the panels in the gutter of a graphic novel and how the reader's mind fills in details between this action and that action to make the two actions make sense. So I'll say that again. So there's that gutter between the panels in a graphic novel, and the reader's mind is activated in the gutter. That activation is called closure. And so my cartoons are really predicated on closure. I'm really thinking hard about where the reader's mind goes and how the reader is being asked to move from loans to friends versus grades, how med school is for robots might lead you down this path. And while I didn't elaborate upon how I got from bingo cards to subway maps, you'll see that all of the cartoons depend upon this notion of closure, of the reader's mind being activated in the process. That's where I think I'm making you up. That's the part of my argument about being human, where I'm making up Rosa, and she is making up you, and we are making up you. because it is your mind that's needed to fulfill this as a narrative act, to complete the narrative act. Where you go, in what direction, isn't actually important to me. I haven't drawn arrows so that you go this direction. What's important to me is that you can't fail in the middle, and that you have the sexual harassment running around that, but otherwise anywhere you want to go in any order is fine with me. Here's the next one. This is entitled Greta Goes to MoMA. And I'll read you the text, but then I would love to hear a conversation, if we can have it, about the way this is working. First and foremost, I should note, this is a fake Mondrian, right? So I'm playing with the paintings of Mondrian, and there are a lot of fake paintings in this project. I've done it a couple times. There's a fake Rothko. It's mostly the geometric painters who are easy to fake for me. The ones who have flatter shapes, easier for this particular one page. So here we go. This says on my Greta Goes to MoMA, those kids need a teacher, for Christ's sakes. Does a flat box up here mean it's the sky? I guess I'm not supposed to make a fuss because it's a museum and all. This box feels naked. It's the best. It's funny how a painting gets so quiet in my head. And T. And then the bigger text block. How am I supposed to see with those kids? If I could run like that, I would run to Little Italy, never go to World Fitness, but the receptionist is cute. That guy's cute. What's the guard doing? Don't let them. There's a real painting. It's pretty, but if you don't see a real color, where is it from? Those kids need to stop. They're like on the M57 at 3 every day. The worst bus. This one's nice. The boxes are. And so here the inner monologue is a little bit different, punctuated by various kinds of other thoughts. And here, unlike the Rosa, there is an interplay between her and her environment. Where Rosa was filling in, she is present in an environment. Here's a narrative context. My question is, where does your eye go first, you, the viewer? Because I'm such a crappy painter, I have no idea. Would someone say? No one's going to say. Someone's got to say.
We're all yelling red.
Red.
I'd say yellow because it's the largest. So I'm thinking proportionally, it's the largest box.
And Corinne, why did you say red?
Why did I say red? Because naked feels the best. But red is the dominant color. And so in your chat, everybody's yelling red.
Oh, I didn't see the chat. Hold on, I gotta get out of that. I was too busy looking at the PowerPoint. Okay, hold on. Let me get into the chat. Reds, everybody. Why am I not getting out? Excuse me just a second. Oh, there we are. Okay, so what's helped, both of those answers are really helpful to me. And really helpful because they completely change what story you're reading. So if you gravitate toward the yellow in the text block and you get into the interior, in her interiority, and monologue is what you get first, then you have a whole nother concept of what she's experiencing. And in fact, you get more room sound, the cute guard. You actually might even get her moving from one room into the room where the Mondrian is, which I think is suggested in the narrative there, that she says, but oh wait, what's that guard doing? Don't let them miss it. But there's a real painting, it's pretty. And then she starts meditating a color and what she thinks that might mean. So if that's what you read first, that of course becomes a kind of it becomes axiomatic for the story that you're now telling yourself and whichever direction you're going. So you go here first, this box feels naked, it's the best. Then in fact, Greta is finding something in the museum that dominates the rest of the storytelling. And that's because of the color. Did you choose the red, Adele? I can't remember. Did you put that one red?
I don't think so. I think you had the colors preset.
I think these were preset. I think you're
Real.
right. Yeah. Okay, so this next one, I am going to show it, and I'm happy to read the text and read the title for you, but then I want to know what you see. I want to turn it to you. Can you read it if I stretch it that much? You can? Okay, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm interested in what you see, how you see it, what order, what you make of it. And it's not a test. So first question, color-wise, where do you start? Once you have the title, once you've read the title, where does the eye go? Where do you start? I kind of think you have two choices. No, huh? You don't want to talk to me. I'm not seeing the chat. That's part of the problem I have.
I think a lot
So-
of orange and head, the top orange box is a lot in the chat. Which is where I looked also.
Okay, why am I not seeing the chat? Because I'm screen sharing?
That's right.
So I can't read the chat because I'm screen sharing.
That's correct.
Okay, so someone has to help because it looks to me like you all just left. Like you got your faces there and I'm talking to Adele, Corinne, and that sounds like me, what I do when I write, but yeah.
Mostly
so-
it's orange.
A
Yeah,
lot of people
so
are saying orange.
orange, right? And so the orange is how do you know me so well, which would be an operative question for this marriage. If it's the blue, together we survive. I think you did this, Adele. Were your decision. I know I didn't, because one of the problems I have is I only have 8 colors. And so Adele and I have run into this where I have these markers, like I have highlighters. This is what I'm working with. And I only have 8 colors. And that's a challenge to me, but also a challenge to Adele. And but I think the high contrast of the orange and the blue are what you did. If I'm not, I think that's right. That your gut was to do that.
Yeah, I would always look at a color wheel and see what a complementary color how that would fit in. So
Yeah.
makes sense.
Hello, what's going on? Oh, you gave me the chat. Oh, I have the chat now. I don't assume that, oh, that's Fuji. I don't assume that you're going to the colors. I don't assume. So the question about why do you go, my question was which color do you see first is not necessarily what you see first. I think after you read the title that you all start searching through the text to write the story and to figure out where each of the texts, so you might go from here, you might go up, you might go counterclockwise, but I'm also not worried about it. Again, I'm just not concerned what direction you might go. I certainly have, in this particular case, tried to marry the form and the content. So I'm thinking hard about knowledge and the head, the neck and the hugs, the camel's hump being together we survive, the time you called my dad an ass is here, The leg, trust holds us up. You're soft here, which is probably for me genitalia. Stop watching me eat. There's the stomach. Sharing everything is the big leg and haunch. And then the nipple. When you're sad, picture my nipple. So I'm trying also to map the camel as it's labeled by Howard as this love act for his husband. Next. Yes, next. Let's go next. I realize I've got two Jews in a row, but it's Passover. It's okay. So this is the next Jew. Oh, I identify. Sorry, I should say that. So this piece is called Rochelle's Zoom interview, round 2, not recorded. And Jaya, the econ should be happy here. We right? And what do you see right away, Jaya? What is this, economist?
X-axis, Y-axis, budget constraint, utility function, but also a production function, and some sort of hump-shaped, the change where preferences change and you never get an equilibrium. So all sorts of things.
Yay! That's a perfect answer. You know how much research I did to try to make that possible? So, and this is one of the joys I have as a fiction writer, is that if I'm inventing people, I'm really trying to invent people who also let me get my nerd on. Like, I'm really trying to allow myself the opportunity to study stuff I have no idea. Like, I have no idea how that works. So Rochelle is on a Zoom interview. And in fact, I will try to give you a little bit more and read from it. And you'll see that these are the comments made by the interviewers. We think you'll be a role model. You'll be a pioneer, haha, and the vaccine will be mandatory. And then here, this is Rochelle's perceptions. It's all about their bond rating. Takes down her family photos, but leaves up her menorah. So I'm thinking of her background and the Zoom. Those might intersect with takes down family photos, and then their comment, you'll meet Moshe, he's Jewish too. And that intersects, or at least meets, the line of her menorah. From Moshe, the third guy doesn't speak, which meets to it's all about their bond rating. That's her suspicion about him. No one mentions their discrimination suit, which doesn't get doesn't get registered, although it's very much present. We think you'll be a role model, meets with you'll be a pioneer, haha, and the second guy's a laugher. And then there's no anything about the vaccine will be mandatory. They just say that and they leave it. I don't know what else I need to say there. Anything?
Anything?
I need to turn down. Sorry. That's some competing audio. Here's a bingo card. So this was early in the process, and I should, I'm happy to say, so the bingo cards really have been haunting me for a long time. And everyone's got their go-to MLA bingo card, and awkward conversation in the elevator, this and that. But I really felt like a bingo card was a narrative, had narrative potential that was very different from just checking off, did you do these things? And so my understanding of the bingo cards and the projects, and I've written about 20 of these, maybe 25 bingo cards. And there are about half a dozen, including this one, that are up, that the Virginia Quarterly has just published. So they're the first of the bingo cards are out in the world. None of the cartoons, more formally, none of the cartoons is out. The bizarre thing about the bingo cards being out in the world is that I sent a query to the Virginia Quarterly because they pay really well for individual works. And in the literary world, it's like, what? They pay really well? And I have a friend who's the poetry editor there, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner named Gregory Pardlow. And Greg wrote back, I said, I've got these bingo cards. I don't know what they are. I want to put them in front of your fiction editor. And he said, oh, I want to see one. So I sent him one. And he said, oh, this is a great poem. And I was like, okay, that's a great poem. That's not a poem, but okay, that's a great poem. He said, send me what you have. And so he took 6 of them and they've just come out and they're online. You'll see them. You'll see Virginia Quarterly Review as poems. He published them as poems. We could talk about that. I don't know. Your free refills is in the center. Mixed into that, and I really see this as a kind of, for me, this is as a sort of nostalgic ring, in part because I'm thinking of the Greek diners in Manhattan, or where we used to live. And I'm thinking of those blue and white Greek diner coffee cups. This to me is a morning after scene. Very much lovers who have gone out for breakfast. And there are any number of characters in it. There's also there's a Jonathan Swift quotation, coffee makes us severe, grave, and philosophical. There are a couple of Greek goddesses, 3, Aphrodite, Athena, and Diana are all here. Here's Diana, the hunter chasing the stag, Athena in the next booth, her armor made from the skin of a giant, which I believe her armor was, if I'm not mistaken. Someone's wallet somewhere in the diner. And again, I don't have a preference for how you put this together. And in fact, the cartoons, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the cartoons has been the way that and maybe Mark also sees this in terms of the work that he studied over the years and the work that he does, but the way these come from hypertext conceptually, like the way they go into ramifying possibilities, and that you write a story that gets bingo this way, but also, I'm sorry, I don't know what I just did. Sorry about that. I think I just increased it. There we go. Stop there. Oh, I know what I can do. I can just go back, right? There we go. Your story can make bingo that way, but it can also make bingo this way, right? And so the possibilities are mathematically fixed for getting bingo. And that's different from, it seems to me, from the kind of open-ended piece that's this, where, yes, if you add up the number, and it tends to be a prime number of options that I offer just because I am who I am, it is those options factorial, technically. So if there are 11 options, it'd be 11 times 10 times 9 in terms of how the narrative is constructed. And with the bingo card, it's a fixed number because you can only get so many bingos. But you can also get bingos going this direction or that direction. So it's actually always twice the fixed number. And that's a lot of narrative possibility. And that to me is a lot of ways, and those are a lot of ways in which you are writing the story. A lot of ways where I feel like I've activated closure, to go back to the MacLeod idea. Okay. I will say, by the way, that there's not precedent for this kind of work. And I have no idea what's going to happen to it. Okay. It doesn't lend itself to a 6x9 book of poems. It lends itself to the internet in larger format. Maybe a coffee table book. Certainly an art installation. Certainly I'm thinking that, like, when I come back from sabbatical, I might hang these up on a wall and maybe even ask the back to have a show kind of thing. But I don't know. And I'm not doing it with the material product in mind. I'm doing it with what I want them to be. All right, so now we're going to move to Adele and me, and spend about 10 minutes and talk through, and then a Q&A. So this is a drawing this is the first draft of a piece of a cartoon. And it is called Leaving the Bar, Ducasse Suddenly Remembers a Trip to the Zoo when she was 6. And you can see that it's related in part to the subway map that I was talking about, where it has different options and you can go travel from here to here to here, or you can go this way and then cut that way. So this work comes out of those subway maps. And Adele and I also spent a lot of time. I sent her a bunch of subway map book, and we were sourcing materials and sourcing various subway maps from around the world. And some of you, I mean, I think Christy certainly knows, you've seen me work with subway maps before. So you know how long these have been in my imagination and how dear to me they are. So I do this. This is what's on the wall in part. I scan it and I upload it and I send it to Adele. And she sends me this. So here is her first version with these colors, which actually I don't have. So that was already interesting. But this came at a point in our working together where we hadn't decided what to do with the font. So this was one of the fonts that she was testing. It then went back. Adele, between this and this, or even to this, what'd you have to do?
So my perception of this piece at first was more of like a net outline of what a prism would become. So that's how I was reading it, but I knew that it was a subway map. So on this one that we're looking at, that's why you're seeing more dots, more subway stops. On the next one, I wanted to emphasize the circles that Alan Michael Parker had outlined in the middle sort of square there. So I filled in those with black at first, and then I thought it'd be interesting to expose the intersections more explicitly. So then I took out the fill in that. So I think you had shown me the first sketch you did again, and I went with those colors instead.
Yeah.
Went back to that, yeah.
Yeah. And also what you might notice is that the words are moving. So the text moves there and back, it moves around. We're also beginning to play with did it rain is now in lowercase to ask it as a sentence rather than perhaps did it rain as the name of a subway stop. So this is part of what we've been negotiating as we go, and it's been specific to each piece. I think that they've very much changed in the back and forth process of our working together. Then something happened, which was I began to worry that the fonts that we were using were in fact too much chosen by Adobe, and that the voice was Adobe's voice because Adobe was choosing the lettering. So that started Adele and my working back and forth with hand lettering. Do you want to talk a bit about that and what you started doing and how that came about? What you tried, Adele?
Yeah, so
I don't have yours here. I just have I skipped a step. But so when I said to you hand lettering, what'd you try?
So I immediately went to a Wacom tablet, which is it basically connects via Bluetooth to computers, and you can log into Photoshop and just write on the tablet, and it'll write right in front of you on the computer screen. So I started using that. It was definitely an adjustment, sort of trying to make it look like normal handwriting was tough. So then I think my handwriting didn't exactly fit the characterization or
Yeah.
something.
So I couldn't hear the voice of the character in Adele's handwriting.
Mhm.
And so that
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
the next step was, okay, so what can I hand letter it? My handwriting's terrible. Like, you professors, you know, like the longer you become a professor, the longer you are a professor and mark papers, the more it looks like you're just flatlining. Like it looks like I'm just my hand has died. So nevertheless, I mean, we played with maybe Felicia, my partner, would hand letter them, but it's still not in the voice that I hear in my head with these characters. And so the next stage was for me to hand letter, put them on pages, and have Adele use a scan app to put my handwriting in on the cartoons. And this is me thinking about my handwriting. And notice something really interesting has happened here. And this has been one of the best parts about our working together. Here it says, Papa bought us paper airplanes on the trip to the zoo. And I realized that whether or not I had been doing it the whole time, I was trying to draw a paper airplane. So on this next draft, there is a rudder. And we talked about, in our notes back and forth, about making it look more like an airplane and the paper airplane, so that the form and content were doing a little better work together. And that's been, over the last 2 months especially, crucial to my understanding of how this project's working. Is that if I'm going to cartoon, the image and the text have to have a working relationship. It can't just be, that's a cool idea, here's a subway map. And there are lots of stops and it ramifies as a narrative. That's not sufficient anymore. So increasingly, the form and the content have to marry. So this was, and notice too that we went from Ducasse suddenly remembers a trip to the zoo when she was 6 to edits and rewrites. And now it's when Odile was 6, the zoo, totally changed the name, changed the storytelling. That also has happened in the revisions. And that version I wrote in pencil, and actually we're having some trouble with it registering. So the latest version is now written with a Sharpie. And this is the final draft. We're far from these colors. We're in new colors, but there's a little bit more of the suggestion of the paper airplane, and the rudder broke is now very much, and I've used the dotted lines a lot to indicate temporality, but the rudder is now also here. And I think I'm there. I think that's what I'm sharing. So I'd love to have questions for both of us. Process-based, content-based, thinking about invention, thinking about where you go when you're in a piece. I'm happy to return to a piece if you have questions about a specific one. And thanks for your attention. I don't have the chat. Oh, I can. Oh, yeah. If I'm going to show images, I have to stay in screen share, so I won't have the chat. So if you don't mind asking your questions by using your inside voice, that would be helpful.
I have a question. Hello.
Hello.
So I guess I was thinking, especially with the first piece, I was like picking up my laptop and like turning it upside down so I could read it and things like that. So I was curious, Adele or either of you, whether you were thinking about, because I know you were saying about like the different ways this could be presented and the way people could experience it, whether you're thinking about like the physical way in which someone encounters this and whether it's like, yeah, what is that a physical experience like for the reader?
That's a great question. So I wrote the text backwards and upside down in this way. Some of it was to fit it into these boxes. Some of it was the convenience of the design and to match the convenience of the design. But more so, I would argue that I'm thinking about the brain as a kind of 3D structure, and that because the image was so flat, I wanted to at least get some mimesis, some imitation of how thought bounces about. And I wasn't interested in writing and rendering a 3D brain. So I'm trying to kind of, it's a little bit of a cheat, I think. But that was my impulse here. I don't know if you read that way, Adele, or another way.
Yeah,
that was that.
I also I think it's really interesting how this one prompts viewers to literally move their head in order to understand this character. And just generally, like, having to move your head just kind of prompts more curiosity, for me at least. So I'm left wondering, I'm left with more questions about this character, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Does to me. What else can we speak to?
It is your son.
Hi, son.
Hold on, let me turn on my video. I think an interesting note in a couple of the more recent ones, the camel and this one, that I would connect is that the faces are both forming visual focal points that are balancing out the text. And it's interesting because the face of the camel is in orange, which is the sort of highlighted color, and it's highlighted because it's the only place where you see orange in the whole thing. So it's warm. It's warmer than all the other colors, and it's also brighter than many of the other colors. Well, it's actually only brighter than the purple. But if you think from a graphic design perspective about these, there are two things in a graphic composition that will always form focal points without any other influence, and they're faces and text. And that's a really interesting sort of piece of visual interplay that all of these are using. And if you're going to be thinking about any visual element, that's what you should be thinking about, is how you're using your faces and how you're using your words and how you're positioning them. That's my commentary on these two.
I think that, Adele, am I wrong? I think that's the only face we have that I've done. Excuse me. I think Rosa is the only, is that the only, I think that's the only face. There are a lot of, is there another one?
I don't think so. I think Rose is the only one.
Well, there's another origami, so there's another animal. There's a badger. But otherwise,
does it have a head? Is its head a focal point? I mean, it's interesting.
I could go find it.
Find a badger.
I could find a badger while we're talking. Is there another question while I'm badger hunting?
Michael, thank you. This is fascinating, and I'm really intrigued by your new work. But I'm going to pop back to the first part of your talk about fiction writing and the characters that you create and trying to create these new ones. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking about characters in books when I finished the book, and then I miss the characters because they become real to me in some way. And that contrasts with, I was just talking with a colleague who said they knew they were done with something they were writing because they hated it and it had to go away. And so I'm wondering how you feel about your characters. Like when you hand them off, do you miss them or do you need them to go away?
I need them to go away. Yeah, and I think some of that is just the process for me is so much, I spend so much time revising that by the time they're in print, especially, there are, for fiction, easily, I mean, the novels they've gone through 4, 5, 6 full passes. And that's after, and a first draft might take 2 years of working on the same characters. So I write them out of my system, I think, more than I have a kind of nostalgia for them. But I can understand that. I mean, it makes sense to me. I also don't think of them as real, and maybe that's sacrilegious, but I don't. They're and then nor do I think that I control them. So I have like, that's the constant push and pull. And I tell this to my students, I talk to them all the time about this. Like, so characters aren't real and they don't have free will. And if I don't believe in their decisions, and if they don't believe in their decisions, your story's not going to work. So it's that combination of the representation of the character with their own choices that we have to believe in. But I, as the writer, know that they don't have their own choices. I chose. I also have to believe in it. And that there's a beyond paradox, I would say contradiction, well-nigh hypocrisy at the center of the creative act for a fiction writer. Because you really have to believe that they exist. And you know the whole time they don't.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Here's a badger. I can give you a badger. Hold on. There's a badger. This one has very few text squares. Because Baldwin said he would like to be reincarnated as a badger, Shirl made him one out of origami. Then they kissed, Shirl's first kiss. And here it says, boys chase her on the tail. Here it says, leggings are Shirl's thing. Here it says, Shirl believes that her heart is everywhere in her body, just under her skin. No boobies yet, which ages her. Cute top and needs glasses too. So first kiss story for me. By the way, in badger research, badgers often are missing their fur on their butts because that's where other badgers attack them. Get your badger nerd on. So there was the badger. Other questions?
I just had one question, Alan. I was wondering with particularly your bingo cards, it seems very democratizing, like the real egalitarian kind of quality to the readership, so that the critic is less likely to be able to pull rank on a single reading. And I wondered if there's still some element of linearity such that he or she who reads with the most complex, interaction between lines of successful bingo wins still trumps with the most critically adept reading, or if it really is democratizing in some interesting way that maybe ordinary fiction doesn't lend itself so straightforwardly to.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I don't think there's a way to win this story. But I do think there's a way to feel like you've won the story. And I think that so that if you go from moment here where it says, yes, but I've got a busy week, which I think of as, okay, they're there the next morning, it's the morning after, they're having their breakfast in the diner, and one of the lovers says, can I see you? Yes, but I've a busy week. And then there's the presents in the next booth, her armor made from the skin of a giant, free refills, a mind in its steamy windows, which is a kind of lyrical assessment, assessment of what the interior of the diner's like. Check out that sweater, which I think one of them says to the other one as a moment of intimacy, like, check out that sweater. But if you read it that way, either way, you could kind of win, because you do there is narrative completion. There's not only your closure of putting together the story and connecting how you get from there to there to there, but there's also the sense that, okay, I've got 5 steps in a little story that I just built. And
Yeah, yeah.
my hope is that you do that more than once with each bingo card. You try a couple of different ways to get bingo, and that you end up choosing which one's your favorite.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I want your agency. I want your narrative decision making. I want you to choose the story that's your adventure. And that is the specific reference, of course, to one of the sources, which is the Choose Your Own Adventure kids books.
It just seems to me to really share the power of imagination that you started with when you were talking about writing your more ordinary fiction.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. I have 2 questions. One regarding the first picture with the skull.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the head. Yeah, so what struck me here is I think there's even another level here, and I wondered if you did this intentionally because 1903 is this era of time when the study of skulls is really, problematic and racially motivated, but also
Yes.
And so can you speak to maybe that leveling here?
Yeah, so between the ways in which brain, head size was used racially, in the eugenics movement as well during this time, and how social Darwinism was being, neo-medicalized in this context. I'm very much aware of race here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much thinking about Rosa, which I think of as a kind of Latinx work name in this context, filling in this head that I also think of as African American.
Interesting.
So I have a historical argument going on as well. That might be my politics, but also might be, she's captivated by this head in her anatomy book, and she's the one who photocopies it.
Yeah.
And puts her life in it.
That's really fascinating. Yeah.
Thank you.
My other question.
But you're right on. I mean, absolutely right on.
Yeah, it's just, so many layers. My other question is actually much more broad and is about, so many of the characters that you've shown us tonight are women. There's a gay man and there's a couple children too. So how do you write characters with whom you personally, you don't live that experience? What sort of?
Very carefully.
Yeah.
That's the first answer. And, as a middle-aged cis white guy, there's always going to be questions. One of my hopes is that if I write enough characters that I kind of get, because each of them is a different character, that I kind of get a little bit of a pass rather than a cancel when it comes to just handling the culture in the moment. Because I am, and Adele knows this, because I did send a group of these to a friend to write a reference for me, and she wrote back, she said, I think you're going to get canceled. And she was really helpful. And that started a conversation between myself and 2 writers, which Adele has seen, and Daniel Linz has seen, about appropriation. So it's really very much on my mind. But I'm still of the maybe outdated, maybe old school thought where I think that the imagination is an act of love. And I think I'm obliged. And I think writing the other is dangerous and essential and unavoidable, and especially as a fiction writer. And one of the responses to this question about appropriation from a dear friend, from a really smart writer, was, if these were poems, you'd be toast, because poetry has a more one-to-one correspondence for readers in terms of the identity of the writer and what's allowed. Whereas fiction, you're kind of allowed to ventriloquate a little more. I can throw my voice more in this genre. But my feeling is if I do enough of these, I can have Rosa and I can have Howard and I can have kids and I can get away with it. But it's very real as a concern.
Thanks so much.
Amp, I have a question. So, I'm reminded of this Nova episode about was mathematics invented or discovered? Right? And at the end of the talk, all these mathematicians weigh in, and they conclude by saying that mathematics may have been, the initial axioms may have been invented, but the rest of it was discovered. And I find that, when I think about the way, as a layperson, when I think about the process of inventing characters, humans, I imagine that the process might be somewhat similar, but, in response to an earlier question, you said otherwise, that even the process of their evolution and character development and how they're going to act, you are ultimately deciding how they're going to act. So I wonder, have you ever been confronted with, in the process of inventing these humans and imbuing them with characteristics, human characteristics, have you been forced to imbue them with characteristics that you may consider inhuman? Just these basic questions. Or do you actually possess all of that information and then make an active choice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know if I can justly say that I am, in a way that, for example, Randy might disagree with this, but the way that I read Shakespeare, and one of way to understand Shakespeare's greatness is that Shakespeare, astonishingly to me, can be read as the sum of all of his characters. And I don't think that's true of me. I don't think I'm Rosa. I contain Rosa. I am all of these people, and that I have, if I'm understanding the question correctly, that I don't think I'm the Godhead. What I do want is I want to be in a circumstance where, in high school they call it whether or not a character acts. Oh, I'm blowing the phrase. It's high school. The high school English teacher says whether that's in character. Like we're studying, like is acting in character. I'm really interested in the moments where characters act out of character and what those warrant, what those dramatize, how that helps us learn about the human condition. So I would say that there's a dynamic, there's a tug, a push and pull for me between what I know about these people and what I hope they tell me about themselves without my really questioning where they're getting that knowledge. So I don't know how to answer it. It's not the muse, and it's not the psyche, and it's not, I'm not a religious person, so it's not from God. But I don't know how to answer that question except to say that I wrote these. But there are things that I write that I understand to be Rosa's and not mine.
So I have a follow-up question to that. And, when you were talking about the graphic novels, John, I promise I'm not snatching the mic away from you yet again. You were right after me, John. Okay. So I'm thinking about when you were talking about the graphic novel.
Right, about McCloud and Closure, yeah.
Yeah, and the gutter, and you talked about how you have to invite the reader and the reader's act of humanity, being human, to fill in for that closure, to make that leap from one panel to the next panel. And I just would like some, is there some regularity? Like I'm thinking as a data person, if I had enough data, could I then accurately predict and then construct my panels in such a way to produce the desired outcome?
Yes, yes, you really can. And so one of the things that McLeod does that's so brilliant is he talks about kinds of closure and aspects. And so he gives you this breakdown, and I really recommend this book, Understanding Comics. So he gives you this breakdown where he, for example, so here he's talking about different kinds of closure and how to identify it and how it makes you act differently, and how that's dependent upon what's in a scene, what's in the next scene, and what's missing, what's in between. So so it reads empirically. I don't think it's empirical, but it reads, at least it's a taxonomy for him, at least. And so there is some pretty good data that I would say that tells you these are different kinds of images you can produce and expect the reader to act and provide the closure in a very specific way. I'm only partially interested in that in this work, because for me in this work, and maybe Andy, I think Andy did identify it. I'm really much more interested in variation and in the factorial as a narrative problem, and that you can have multiple narratives, any one of which might let you win the bingo game.
Thank you. I really like, Alan Michael, what you were saying about your growth and evolution as an artist. Like a pandemic happens and your normal way of working just wasn't working for you anymore. You had to change. But I'm wondering if you go back now to some of your earlier works that you worked hard to try to make it seem, in the way that Jaya was talking about, seem credible, seem human, so that your readers kind of are there with you, that no longer work. Like you go back and say, well, I thought at the time that was the way humans are, but now I don't think that anymore. And if that's true, why is that true? Have you changed? Has the culture changed? What does it mean to?
Yeah, changed. And the culture, I mean, everyone's, we're all different, right? So, but when it comes to rereading earlier work of my own, it's a little bit an answer to Christie's question also. I'm kind of relentlessly unnostalgic. I'm always interested in making up the next thing. And, I know that some of you look at me askance by way of my being prolific. And I would too. I mean, it's really kind of bizarrely fanatical how much I make. And a lot of it's shit, it has to be for it to get better. And I'm happy with that. But I just almost never look back, John. I don't like the next project. I'm already thinking about the next one. What interests me next? My passwords tend to be some cryptic version of the next book I'm going to write. For my, vanilla password, as well as what I'm going to tell TI. I'm always, it's my deep fanaticism as well as my identity. I just make stuff and make the next thing, and I make the next thing and try to have my expertise make the next thing better. Try to have my learning and let the world change with the world, and let that change the work. I also have a deathly fear of self-parody as an artist. Really, really like that any book I write is going to be a weaker version of an earlier book. I'm deathly afraid of that. And so some of my models as working artists tend to be people like Picasso, right? Who has all of those varieties of Picasso aesthetics, periods in his life. Yeats is like that. 4 great moments in Yeats's career. Turns out both of those guys were assholes, so I'm a little worried. But yeah, the reinvention is deep in my process, my practice, and my person. It's deep in my teaching, improvisational thinking. It's deep in my in who I am, and so I don't look back. And probably for reasons that hurt me, but I don't.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you? That was
I'm
thank
well.
you. I just wanted to ask a quick question about the little text fragments. I was wondering if you view them ever as poems or as smaller pieces of a narrative yet to be written, or whether or not that responsibility falls to the readers.
You're so smart, Lily. Shit, I don't know. No, they're not poems. That's I don't have any kind of crossover issues between poetry and fiction. They're not poems, but because this genre is so different for me, because the dual, you know, the dual nature of the cartooning in addition to the text is so new. I'm really thinking about storytelling. I will say that the poetry training kicks in because one goal in those text units is to use as few words as possible. And I'm almost never editing up and almost never adding language. With each pass to Adele, there are fewer words. The Mondrian, this is a significant exception in the work, is to have a text block like this. Much more likely for me to have the word tea and let it be known to you that's what she wants. And that's what she's thinking about. But again, as a kind of narrative puzzle of sorts for you to figure out. So not so much on the poems, which is a reason why I was kind of shocked when this editor, with his Pulitzer Prize in poetry, said, those are great poems. I was like, Now there's some lyrical language, right? A mind in its steamy windows, all the new lovers. I'm trusting the language, but I'm not thinking of them as poems. And I think it speaks in part to, again, to Andy's question about, you know, how you get bingo. They're stories to me. They're flash fiction. I don't know if that's true. They're one-page stories, but they're cartoons.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Why do you write? You're fanatical about doing new things. Why?
Death sucks.
Well, you're going to die just as soon or just as late, whether you write or not.
Happier, maybe, at the end. I don't know. You're right. I don't know, John. Why? I think that's a question I don't ask myself much now at this age. I think that I've just accepted this compulsion. Whereas, like in my teens and 20s, I would put the candle in the bottle, and at 4 a.m, I'd have that conversation with my friends, and there'd be lots of silences. Someone would say, dude. And then we would, then I just don't ask it anymore. And maybe I should ask it, but I don't ask it anymore. I did ask, and I still ask, and that's again part of the motivation for this work, is what is my job as a writer and as an artist? That's a different question. But why I do it, I'm not asking that. And not because I'm afraid of it. It would get in the way. Hello, Saskia, friend.
Hi, I actually have a question. So you were talking about before how a lot of times you would write your characters kind of out of your system, but I was curious like whether you would ever come back to them in this format or if you have done that.
I have come back to characters. That has happened. But when I come, so there is a kind of muse figure, a woman who has been in a lot of my poems. and she's often got a very specific job in the poem. And she has recurred. She's total shapeshifter. So like she's been a waitress, and she's worked at a car wash, and I understand her to be the same person who's haunting me as a character. So in that sense, she's not done. And maybe that's the wrong answer for Christy also. But it's not nostalgia. It's just that she is part of my pantheon of demons. And then in the stories and in the novels, in my first novel, I wrote a character who is a cop, and he doesn't talk much. And I don't know if you've tried this as a writer, but writing a character who doesn't talk is really hard. Like really, really hard, because you have to communicate non-verbally with words who the person is. And that fascinated me. And as a result, I've now written a bunch of characters who don't talk, who don't like to talk. I like the formal problem of that. They're not the same guy, but they're sort of the same guy. I haven't come back to characters here. There are a couple of these, and I didn't go into this work. There are a couple of these actually that are triptychs, and there are a couple that are diptychs, but they're only very few, and it really would confuse the matter if I were to present those now. But there are a couple that have 3 panels. One's a bingo card, one's a map, one's a something else, an EKG, and so in the sense, but they're also still thought, I still think of them as one story.
Hey,
Adele, have you seen the same characters?
Not really.
Do you perceive any of them in the same way? Do you?
I think there's a similar voice sometimes, and those are usually the ones that I relate to more. The voice is more, it's like a young teenage girl's voice. It's very relatable. Like some of them are very relatable to me. But I do have a 2-part question for you.
Yay.
So firstly, when are you most inspired? And second one, do you ever psychoanalyze yourself? Because I do that a lot as a painter after I paint something, or yeah.
I tend to be a morning person in terms of my inspiration. I like a clean brain and a lot of coffee. And that my best working moments are in the mornings. When I am not teaching, and in fact, when I attend residencies, like I'll go to an artist colony for a month, my goal in those circumstances, and this for me is an ideal working environment, is actually to have 2 mornings. So I get up at 5, I work, I limp to lunch, I nap for a couple of hours, and then I get up and I do it again. So I try to maximize by having a 2-morning day, because I really do well under those circumstances. It's harder for me to compose original work at the end of the day. And that's the flip-flop between being your age and in school and having to work all night in your studio. Like I don't have, like that flips. I was totally nocturnal. Now I feel like I'm diurnal. And then the psychoanalysis, yeah, of course, it's relentless. Like, of course, you're always thinking like, where did that come from? Why did I think that? What's wrong with me? And the answer is yes. Like, it's always like, yes, where did that come from? Yeah, the same spot where what's wrong with me is why did I think that is yes. But I don't wield my work against me. Like it's not, I don't weaponize my output against my happiness. And that's been really important to learn. I can write an awful story and get really frustrated, but it doesn't make me worse of a person. I'm already rotten. That's not, I'm already burning in hell. That's the easy answer.
Thank you.
My students will tell you that.
Well,
AMP, this was a wonderful conversation, and I'd like to thank you and Adele and Mark Sample and all the participants and everyone who asked questions. Thank you for your presence. I'd like to remind you, April 27th, 7 p.m., Professor Helen Cho from Anthropology will be giving the next and the last Being Human talk for this semester. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting. I appreciate it. Take care, all.